Welcome to Guided by Love, the podcast. I'm Nick Place, the producer and host of this show. This podcast is a companion to the book Guided by Love, A Minister's Thoughts on Love, Hope, and Justice, written by Reverend Rebecca M. Bryan, the settled minister at First Religious Society Unitarian Universalist in the beautiful seaside town of Newburyport, Massachusetts. Today's featured sermon is titled Unfolding and was delivered on December 8th, 2019. Because the sermon was delivered before the church gained recording capabilities in the sanctuary, we've decided to approach this episode a bit differently than past episodes. As you'll hear, the interview portion was recorded live at a recent event held at FRSUU. Other portions of this episode were recorded in the studio with Reverend Rebecca and myself, including the sermon. Let's now head into the sanctuary with Reverend Rebecca, where we're talking about process theology, the main subject of her sermon. In some ways, it's about how we are all co-creators with God, which is also love. God is love, and that is the responsibility of each of us to go out into this world and exist in love with each other, and that by doing this, we have a positive effects on individuals and the world. Did I get that right?
You did great.
Fantastic. Could you tell us about a recent experience you had, which displays the effect or embodiment of process theology?
Sure, Nick, thanks. And, I was thinking about when we put together this program this evening that the middle of this is called unfolding. And we can think about what's happening in our own lives and in the country and ask ourselves, with what is unfolding, who are we? How do we respond? What do we do? And so, as you'll hear, I'll read some excerpts in a moment, but about process theology and what it really is. But it's a very empowering way to understand that we are a part of what is happening, and that how we are, how we act, how we think, how we carry ourselves impacts everything around us, often in ways we can't even begin to understand. And so I'll use a small example. And you'll hear a little bit, or if you read the full reflection, it's also mirrored or also exhibited in quantum physics. It's what happens with particles. So if you look at it from a scientific way, you've got energy or particles kind of randomly moving along, and then they collide. They come into each other, and then they're both changed and they go in different ways. And this is happening in ways we can't even comprehend, but it happens in our own lives as well. So just this morning, actually, Nick and I were supposed to get together and be recording for the podcast, and I wanted a cup of coffee, and I went across the street to New Kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and I came out of New Kitchen and literally, I'm serious, collided with the president of our board of the congregation. He was walking one way down the street, and I came out of New Kitchen with some rapidity because I was late to meet with Nick. And in that moment, we both had a choice. We could have apologized quickly and moved on. We could have been irritated. There was a lot of ways we could have responded. And so here is how I see this happen. That what I did just instinctually, because if we practice enough following goodness, following the call of love, which is bravery, which is honesty, which is showing up, which is being uncomfortable. Love is so much more than that romantic understanding of love. So what I did in that moment is I just stopped, and I looked him in the eyes and I said, "How are you?" And we had about a 10-minute conversation that I know changed me, and I hope changed him also in a really positive way. And so imagine that every single moment of our lives, that is happening.
And we take that along with us throughout the day, right?
We take it along with us, and it's how I then talk to you. But it's happening in every moment. And so we are literally changing what's unfolding all the time.
That's amazing. And so how does that effect of process theology apply to what is happening in the world today? How can we walk around today?
We can, I try to speak in affirmatives, but we can understand that we really have no idea what we're doing and the results of what that will be. And so rather than acting as though it doesn't matter, for one example, the issues are too big, right? What can we do about climate change? What can we do about what's happening with just name the list? Rather than that, we can actually own the agency that we have, and we can do what we believe is the next thing and trust that that matters. And so I think right now there is this tendency or risk of us all falling into despair or feeling powerless. And I want to challenge us all to realize as well that sitting home or sitting in a bar with your friends or whatever, walk on the rail trail with your friends, raging with each other, echoing and saying, yes, 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 yes. What is that creating, and what is that actually doing to actually begin to bring about some of the changes that we want? So it isn't just, I think we can fall prey to thinking, well, people who aren't doing anything are the ones who are not showing up, who are being, maybe staying at home or not looking, and all that may be true, but I also believe that if what we are doing is creating more rage, more anger with the people who are going to echo that back to us, while looking away or actually not doing whatever thing we can for those who are most impacted and hurt, is something I encourage us all to look at.
That sounds like this aspect of responsibility and wonder, which you've talked to me about, which is an aspect of process theology.
Yes.
Can be involved in that. Yeah.
Right, because if we realize, once we realize, those are the two words that came to me after really spending time with this, living this, studying this, that when we understand these truths that are seen in science and that are happening all the time in our own lives, we have two choices. There are two realities. We can respond to the world with wonder, with amazement, and to recognize our own responsibility in how things are unfolding.
Reverend Rebecca, in your sermon, you read a portion of the poem titled The Servant Girl at Emmaus. Tell us about this.
So yes, Nick, this poem is entitled The Servant Girl at Emmaus by Denise Levertov. Remembering that the setting of this poem is a servant, a black young woman, who is seeing Jesus after he has resurrected, as the story goes, and it is her recognizing who he is, as many people are not. And the poem is entitled The Servant Girl at Emmaus. She listens, holding her breath. Surely that voice is his, the one who had looked at her once across the crowd, as no one had ever looked, had seen her, had spoken as if to her. Surely those hands were his, taking the platter of bread from hers just now, hands he had laid on the dying and made them well. Surely that face, the man they'd crucified for sedition and blasphemy, the man whose body disappeared from its tomb, the man it was rumored now some women had seen this morning, alive? Those who had brought this stranger home to their table don't recognize yet with whom they sit. But she in the kitchen, absently touching the wine jug she's to take in, a young black servant intently listening, swings round and sees the light around him and is sure.
Reverend Rebecca, thank you so much for that. Tell us, how do you see this poem as displaying process theology?
One of my most profoundly transformative evolutions in my own faith, and something a lot of people are intrigued by and drawn to. And I chose this poem as an example because in process theology, as you'll hear in the reflection, the sermon, it really is about an understanding that God, this energy of love, God is love, this energy of love is relational, and that how we respond to something, to a person, a situation, to an experience, changes everything that comes after. So if, for example, we were to miss a beautiful sunset, right? We're walking along and we're busy, or we're in our thoughts, or we're engrossed in an argument or whatever, if we miss it, right? Love is, creation is offering this beautiful sunset, and we miss it. It's not that we're wrong or bad, but that choice of to see or not see that sunset and allow it to interact with us and perhaps stun us into silence, perhaps bring us into a place of perspective taking, perhaps allow us to soften our heart, which will then change how I am in the next moment with the person I'm talking to or the thought I'm having. That's process theology. So I chose this poem because here it is in the story. However you understand that, as a story or a truth, it's almost irrelevant for this experience I'm sharing. Here it is, right? All these people are not recognizing that this is the rabbi, this is the teacher who was killed for speaking truth. And they're busy, doing their own lives, and they're at a dinner, and they're not seeing even who's with them. And this servant girl is. And she's observing and saying, wait, those hands, those are the hands that healed people. Wait, that voice, that's a voice who actually saw me in a crowd. And in so doing, she turns around and she sees the light around him, the truth, the teacher, the rabbi, who has arisen against all odds. She saw that sunset, and that will change her. And then she will respond differently. We don't know the rest of that story, but it's a beautiful moment of how we're in relationship to what is happening. And so I chose that as an example of process theology.
Thank you for that reading. I feel it's important that we hear the entire poem so we can understand the full context when you refer to it later in the sermon, which we'll hear momentarily. But before we do, I'd like to ask one question. In the sermon, you mentioned the word creation. Typically, I think about that word as referring to the Christian God having created the world. In your sermon, you say, the dignity and honor of all creation. And I just find that interesting in the context of your sermon.
I'm glad you asked that question, Nick. It's an important one. I am not talking about a creation as built by that Christian God in 7 days. I am talking about, and I'm not a scientist, but the natural evolution that has happened and continues to happen in the beauty of the earth, of the planets, of the solar systems, the miracles of all of that we are impacting every single time. We take a breath, we exhale, we choose what to eat, what to do, where to step. So that is the creation I am talking about. I guess you'd say the Big Bang, but that it's ongoing, and we are part of that. So thank you for asking that, because it's used in a different way.
Well, thank you so much for that, Reverend Rebecca. Why don't you take us into the sermon?
So this sermon is entitled Unfolding. And it starts, if I can just invite everyone to come into where I was when this started, because it starts with a moment. So this was about 12, 13 years ago, and I was living at the time in Newton, Massachusetts, and I was meditating. It was a fairly small place I was renting and living in, and so I had created a nook at the bottom of the stairs to the second floor where I would meditate. There was enough of a landing at the bottom and a window where the sun would come in, and so I would sit there on my cushion each morning and meditate. And this particular morning, as I was sitting there with the sunlight streaming in, early morning sun, I actually had a thought come to me that was unbidden. It was not a thought of my own making where I was planning the day. I was just sitting there in the sun, and this thought came. And I'll start there. God is not inevitable. God is not inevitable. I was sitting in meditation when this thought came to me. God is not inevitable. Though it was something I had never considered, it brought me great joy. It felt like a light had been turned on in my mind, leaving years of spiritual seeking, questioning, and learning just hanging in abeyance. You see, I'd been living with a spiritual conundrum for decades. I felt as though, and sometimes even knew intuitively, that there's more to life than meets the eye. I longed for a connection to that something greater, something larger than I, a guiding force of love. I grew up steeped in Western thought, philosophy, and religion, specifically Christianity. And in those teachings, and as I was taught, God was portrayed as a male, a being not of this realm, a male being of this type, not of this physical realm, this male being that never changed. Above all, this God that I was taught about was all powerful. So you might imagine the contrast between what I had just experienced in this meditation, God is not inevitable, and this male God above the earth that never changed. The contrast created great conflict within me. How could this all-powerful God cause bad things to happen in the world? Worse yet, how could God possibly allow evil to exist? Why weren't my prayers answered as a child? I knew that this anthropomorphized white male bearded God in the sky wasn't real. And yet my longing for God, whatever God was, never stopped. This longing for God and knowing what I was taught wasn't true was maddening. It was distressing and sometimes all-consuming. My efforts to reconcile all of this included, I tried not believing in anything. I tried not to be spiritual. I tried returning to the beliefs of my childhood and making those fit. I explored many different religions. The one thing that never occurred to me was that this underlying assumption I had was wrong. The assumption, for example, like God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and never changing. I kept trying to solve my quandary by either changing the extrapolations of those beliefs or premises or disregarding the premises. I never questioned whether those premises that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and never changing, I never questioned whether they were true. The one philosophy and theology that allows me to integrate my rational mind and my spiritual longings is called process theology. I was introduced to process theology during seminary. It intrigued me then, but it didn't change me. It was only this revelation during meditation that God is not inevitable that actually led me to revisit and reconsider what process theology has to offer. That has been a joyous, exciting, and most of all, liberating experience. Process theology, or process philosophy, as it was originally termed, was developed by Alfred North Whitehead in the 1920s. Whitehead was a British mathematician and philosopher. He was looking for a unifying underlying theory that could apply to and explain everything. His resultant process theology has been furthered by various academics, philosophers, and theologians, including the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote his own dissertation on a process theologian named Henry Nelson Wyman. The principles of this theology, this philosophy, this way of thinking have striking resonance with our Unitarian Universalist principles. Sources for the information of this particular sermon that I'm offering come from the writings of Alfred Whitehead as analyzed by one of his mentees, Robert Mesley, and from two contemporary sources, Adrienne Marie Brown, an activist and student of Octavia Brown and Grace Lee Boggs, and Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, the first Jewish theologian and non-Christian to apply this philosophy to their religion. I have particularly enjoyed and learned a lot from Rabbi Artson's book entitled God of Becoming and Relationship. With credit to all of those people and their theories, their work, and their teachings, I want to summarize process theology by one sentence. Process theology can be summarized by this sentence: we live in and are co-creators of a connected, relational, dynamic universe. We all live in and are co-creators of a connected, relational, dynamic universe. This means that the future is not predetermined. Though the past is an indelible part of that yet-to-be-determined future, we still have choices. Thus, how we act matters. If we are a part of this connected, relational, dynamic universe, then so is everyone and everything else, including all people, the earth, and all of her creations and creatures, and God, or love itself. Process theologians believe that God is not an ever-constant, all-knowing force outside of this universe. Rather, they believe, as do I, that God is a part of the universe, malleable and changed as a result of the decisions being made every day by humans and other living creatures. Yes, process theologians believe that God changes. Rabbi Artson writes this, and I'll quote, "The world and God are expressions of continuous, dynamic, relational change. We and the world are not solid substances, but rather recurrent patterns of energy, occasions that change with each new instination. They also maintain continuity from moment to moment. We are interconnected, each to each and all to all. Therefore," he writes, "all creation, not just humanity or a subset of humanity, has value and dignity. We respond to the decisions of each other and of the totality as we ourselves are recreated in each instant." End quote. For those of you who enjoy quantum physics, this may sound familiar. For example, consider Brownian motion or random walk, which a church member recently taught me about. Brownian motion is how molecules relate to one another in air. The molecules are running parallel to each other until they collide, or they're randomly moving throughout these molecules, moving randomly throughout the universe until they collide with one another. And at the point that they collide, each molecule then veers off in a different direction, changed by that collision or interaction. You can't predict where things will go. Every collision or interaction is a result of many collisions from the past, each leading toward the present moment. That's known as the random walk of molecules. Think of our own lives. It's important to discuss how process thinkers understand and define God. For them, myself included, God is a source of goodness, ever present, but not all-powerful or all-knowing. Therefore, predestination does not exist. God understands the past and invites us to choose our actions. God is an energy that actually makes our relating possible. God does not coerce. God does persuade and invite. That ever-present, loving energy of goodness is always there, inviting us. It persuades by the fact that it is beautiful, it is calming, it is energy providing, it is soothing, it is connecting. It's calling us to choose it. But we always have a choice. Robert Mesley writes, "In the fullest sense possible, then, God is love. God is perfect relational power." He goes on to describe God in terms of relatedness and process rather than an unchanging, static being unaffected by the world. This way of thinking allows us to consider God anew. Rabbi Artson writes that people in the West assume the only way to understand religion is by applying traditional Western thought, which includes dualism, good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no, which forces us to choose between mind and body, science and faith, spiritual and physical. They take, he writes, Neoplatonicize Aristotelian scholastic presumptions, and they filter religion through those ideas. Messel writes about the possibilities that come with applying the process thinking of connected relationality over the dualistic Platonic thinking, and to see ourselves as 100% natural and a part of that process. So what does all of this mean? I ask, what are the possible implications as these premises relate to our own joy and our own day-to-day lives, even in these times, with so much that's going on around us? And I answer those questions with 2 words: wonder and responsibility. Thinking from a process approach allows us to experience wonder, amazement, and joy, and to be touched by the world. At the same time, it creates a sense and a reality of responsibility for each and every one of us, calling us to respond to what we experience in this world in ways that point toward good, wholeness, equality for all living beings, equity, justice. When we live in a dualistic world, believing that we must choose, for one example, between our head and our heart, or between spirituality and reason, or science and faith, it leads us to be cut off from our own integrated self, and thus from the interconnected web of life of which we are all a part. Whitehead believed that, quote, morality is tied up with the breadth of one's vision. And he wrote, if I see my life as totally disconnected from others, no moral vision is possible. End quote. As co-creators, I say, living with this knowledge that we are connected to all, there's no other option but to act in ways that uphold and further the inherent worth and dignity of all people and all of creation. A UU minister, a colleague of mine, uses process theology to talk to the youth or teenagers in her congregation about God. She shares with me a story. One day, one of the teens in her congregation asked her if she believed in God. And she said, yes, I do, and explained what that God means to her. And she did it through a story. She said to the teenager, think of the Boston Marathon bombing. Remember the people who ran back into the explosion and the flames, risking their own safety to rescue and help other people. That is God, as I understand God, she said. And I agree. The people at that bombing were facing a decision. They didn't ask to be in the situation they found themselves in that day, victims of a bombing. It was, as we discussed earlier, an example of Brownian motion, molecules randomly moving through life and colliding with what happened. Those people that went back in chose to follow the persuasion, the call of love, that called them to act in love, in bravery. We are faced with decisions like that, though of different dimensions, hundreds of times every day. Most apparently innocuous, but are they? Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, may he rest in peace, told children to look for the helpers in any crisis. Yes, and as adults, we are also called to be those helpers, so that when our children look for them, helpers exist. When refugee children look for them, helpers exist. We can choose to lean into what is unfolding, to act in love, and to allow that same love to support us. It isn't about whether our actions are big or small. We generally don't know the results of our actions. Choosing love might include writing a postcard to incarcerated people to let them know they're not forgotten. Visiting homebound neighbors, delivering beautiful ornaments that children might make. Giving getting proximate or close to people who are oppressed, standing outside a detention center holding a sign that says, "We are here." Sending loving kindness in your meditations to those who are hurting. Contrary to what media may want us to believe, it's actually in our DNA to do this, to follow the persuasion of goodness. Rebecca Solnit studies how people react in times of crisis, and in her book entitled A Paradise Built in Hell, Rebecca tells stories of crises, including as one example the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina. In all of those situations and many more, most people reacted with selflessness, benevolence, and love toward their fellows. People grew closer during the crisis, building community through their shared challenges. Solnit writes, and I quote, "When all of the ordinary divides and patterns are shattered, most people step up. Not all, but the great preponderance of people step up to become their brother's keepers. And that purposefulness and connectedness brings joy, even amid death, chaos, fear, and loss." End quote. Whether or not process theology appeals to you, Unitarian Universalism believes that revelation is not sealed, that we are a part of what is called a living tradition, that we believe in dialectical humanism. This means we will change as a result of learning new information. We will come to believe something different from what we have believed before as a result of relationship. This is at the core of process theology and process thinking. At every moment, we can decide whether to choose love or God, to use the terms of process theologians. In other words, God or love is not inevitable. It is our choice whether to choose it. Above all, process thinking allows us and asks us to open ourselves and to see what is unfolding within us, around us, and between us. Returning to the poem, The Servant Girl at Emmaus, Denise Levertov reminds us of the need to be willing to see, to actually see and respond to love. The servant girl, the one who saw that this was the rabbi who had been raised from crucifixion, while others were too busy to see, said this. The servant girl said those who had brought this stranger home to their table, they didn't yet recognize with whom they sat. But she in the kitchen, absently touching the wine jug she's about to take in, a young black servant intently listening, swings around and sees the light around him and is sure. At that moment, the Brownian movement or random walk, when the past comes together and two things connect in the present, the servant and all of us have a choice to see. I have no doubt how she responded. And the question is, how will we? Amen.
Thank you for joining us on Guided by Love, the podcast. The next episode will be our Thanksgiving episode and will air in 2 weeks on Monday, November 17th. Please make sure to follow and subscribe to Guided by Love on your favorite podcast app. If you'd like more information about First Religious Society Unitarian Universalists in Newburyport, Massachusetts, please visit frsuu.org. That's frsuu.org. If you'd like to purchase a copy of the book Guided by Love, please visit your local bookstore and request a copy, or visit your favorite online bookshop. This episode is a production of FRSUU Newburyport and was edited by me, Nick Place. Thank you as always to Reverend Rebecca M. Bryant for sharing her thoughts and sermons with all of us. See you next time on Guided by Love, the podcast, and until then, be kind to yourself, live in peace, and return again in great joy.